This is Dateline News and Conversation. Tonight is going to be a little bit different. This will be a monologue. I have been wanting to comment on a number of things. And so tonight, the topics will be many and varied, none the least all important. Now, recently, Donald Trump has said he doesn't want to waste his time for another meeting with Putin in Budapest, Hungary. And the following day, he imposed his own sanctions on Russia, followed up by the EU posing its 19th package of sanctions on Russia. We'll talk about that and the specifics in just a moment. Trump has indicated that neither side, Zelensky and Ukraine and Russia and Putin, are willing to agree to a ceasefire and peace talks. Well, quite frankly, he's full of shit. It is very obvious that Trump is a minus habens. That's Latin for he's lacking a lot up here. There's not much there. And it is also quite obvious that not only is Trump inconsistent and vacillating from one day to the next on positions that he's taken, but it is obviously extremely clear to anyone who can be objective, he's being controlled by unseen powerful forces. Some of them are seen. Democrats and Republicans in Congress who want to keep this war going. Lindsey Graham is another one. But then there's the deep state. The deep state is made up of players like the military-industrial complex. To make that clear, it's all of the Raytheons, all of those companies that are producing weapons of war that want this war to continue. Now, I'm going to state this right up front. It's been the intention of the United States and the UK, at least since the end of World War II. That's my generation. I've lived through all of it. The stated objective of the United States of America has been to inflict a strategic defeat on first the Soviet Union, and since 2020, 25 years ago, a strategic defeat. The expressed foreign policy of the United States vis-a-vis Russia to destroy it, to break it up, and to steal its resources. This is what the United States, this is what the UK, Great Britain, England, for 500 years, along with other colonialists across the EU, have been doing to countries around the world, as I said, for 500 years. That period, that epoch, is over. Now, in terms of the conflict in Ukraine, I would like people to take note and pay attention. Unfortunately, all of the so-called influencers, those big rock star podcast people who rose to fame with the beginning of the 2022 Russian special military operation in Ukraine, they call it an invasion. They claim it was the assassin Putin who began all of this. I'm not going to go back over that. I'm only going to pick it up from where we are today. Trump has insisted on a ceasefire. Why is that not going to happen? Well, it's not going to happen because a ceasefire is only going to allow Ukraine, NATO, and the United States to re-equip, and to come back stronger than perhaps they were before. That is totally misguided. Russia learned because they lied about Minsk 1 and Minsk 2. They have lied about every opportunity for peace and their plans for peace, which have been all totally unacceptable to Russia. Russia, President Putin, the Kremlin, the military, the security complex all know that the United States and the UK and the EU cannot be trusted. Now, let me tell you why Russia cannot quit, why Russia cannot agree to a temporary pause. Take note of this. Russia has lost too many dead, wounded, missing in action, captured in this conflict with Ukraine. The government does not publish the number of deaths and wounded. On the other hand, it's been estimated that Ukraine has lost close to 2 million dead, wounded, missing in action, those who have fled the war, and the millions who have left Ukraine. For Russia, the vast majority of them came to Russia and other countries. Russia has also lost God knows how many. It's estimated that it could be close to 1 million dead, wounded, captured, missing in action. This is why Putin cannot quit. This is why President Putin cannot compromise on any of the major goals and objectives of the special military operation. I will repeat. Number one goal, the complete demilitarization of Ukraine. What that means is Ukraine will not have the ability to pursue any further war and activities of a military intention against Moscow, against Russia. That means there will be no mercenaries. That means there will be no US, Canadian, English, French, Danes, Norwegians, Poles actively fighting and or supporting Ukraine in their attacks on Russia. I want to underline that. The complete demilitarization. The second goal, the complete denazification of Ukraine. Now, many people say, oh, there are no Nazis in Ukraine. For the last 80 years, the followers of Stepan Bandera have increased their importance and power and influence beginning in Western Ukraine and throughout the rest of the country. It has met great resistance from many, if not all, of the native Russian speakers who dwell in parts of Ukraine from Odessa all the way to the other end, east to west, north to south, including the Donbas region. It's going to take decades of re-education to eliminate this Nazi evil ideology from Ukraine, where previous governments have canonized Stepan Bandera, named streets after him, erected monuments in his honor, and there are many people in Ukraine who actually believe in this. They have a deep-seated hatred of Russia. The third goal of the special military operation has been the complete neutrality of Ukraine. Let me translate what that means. Never, no, ever. membership in NATO by Ukraine. Period. The complete neutrality. Now, what that's going to take is a complete revision of the Constitution of Ukraine to eliminate all of the Bandera Nazi ideology, to eliminate all of the hatred of Russia, to eliminate the laws that prohibit native Russians to use their own language, to eliminate all of the laws that have been persecuting the Orthodox Church, what they claim has been allied to Moscow. This is huge. Now, what nobody's talking about, except Putin, totally ignored by Trump, by all of those idiotic envoys, those minus habens, those people with small IQs, they're all former business partners of him. What they don't understand are the root causes. They refuse to acknowledge, even if they understand them. And what are the root causes? Putin has explained it over and over and over again. Sergei Lavrov, Russia's top-notch, unequal foreign minister, has said it over and over again. Sergei Lavrov. Russia is complaining that the West and the United States will not acknowledge its basic security architecture and needs. It goes back to 1991, when then Secretary of State James Baker under Ronald Reagan, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, he made a promise. It was oral, and it's also been documented in writing to Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO, the West, would not move 1 inch eastward towards what remained of the Soviet Union, i.e., Russia. Bill Clinton became president, and he immediately violated that promise. And in these last years, NATO has advanced and consumed somewhere around 9 or 10 former Soviet republics and basically has surrounded Russia. Ukraine sits on Russia's doorstep immediately. Other countries are separated by water on both sides. They're separated by thousands of kilometers, but Ukraine is on Russia's doorstep. This is why Russia cannot quit, because the West refuses to recognize Russia's demands for security. What do I mean by security? It's not what the U.S. means. When the United States says our basic security needs are not on the safety and the security of the United States of America, North America, what they're talking about is energy, oil, rare earth minerals, resources from other countries that America has needed and still needs to be successful and prosperous. Russia is merely asking for the West to put down their weapons, put down their threats, and agree to allow Russia to live in peace with all of them. The second point I want to make about this, it's being argued by analysts that, well, what the United States is trying to do is pressure Russia by imposing more sanctions, which don't work. You have to take my word for that. I live here. The sanctions have boomeranged. It's only hurt people like me and other Americans living here because we have a difficult time getting our money from the United States. Our credit cards don't work. Travel has doubled in expenses and doubled in the amount of time it takes to go back and forth. But the Russians and the Kremlin are not pressured and will not be pressured to make any deal that is not going to ensure their basic security demands. Let me tell you how they view Trump. On the one hand, some think that, oh, Trump is really good. He's a businessman. He's all about development and deals. The vast majority of people know that he's a fool and that he's being controlled by the deep state. Most people know that Budapest will be another nothing burger, a bust, just like Alaska. Why? Well, it's simple. Russia's national security needs and demands will not be considered. Russia's basic survival, underline that, survival as a sovereign nation is what's at its stake. This is why Russia will not be pressured and why Russia will not kick the can down the road again. Because everybody in Russia knows that it will only lead to a resumption of conflict, of war against Russia at some time down the road. I'm going to repeat this. All major goals of the special military operation must be achieved before Russia will stop not only the special military operation in Ukraine, but when Russia continues with the rest of the civilized world, the BRICS nations plus, which now numbers some 20 or 30 countries in Asia, the global south, which is South America, which is Africa. This is the new world order. Russia and these countries will not bow down any longer to the pressure and the threats of the dying hegemon, the UK, the United States. Now, I want to talk about something that is a little unrelated, but really related. The recent sanctions on Russia's two major oil producers, Rosneft and Lukoil, have resulted in a 5% jump in terms of brute cruel futures. This happened just yesterday, and they're headed for the biggest weekly rise since early June. Do you know what this means for Russia? It means that Russia's exports increase, and that what also increases is the billions of rubles, yuan, and whatever into Russia's coffers, into Russia's banks. It's backfired. These sanctions are totally insane. They boomerang to come back and hurt not only the rest of the United States, but all these other countries that are allied with them. Now, let me make one other point. It's been the talk for the last few weeks that Trump might not send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Let me make this perfectly clear. For anybody who knows the least bit about Tomahawk missiles, number one, they're very old, some 25 years old. But number two, the big threat to Russia is that these Tomahawks are capable of being tipped with not only conventional warheads, but nuclear warheads. Sending them to Ukraine means that the time for a Tomahawk to reach Moscow is less than a couple of minutes. How is Russia to know if that warhead is not equipped with a nuclear missile? There's no way. The amount of time to make that decision is less than 2 minutes, even less than that to hit places like St. Petersburg and other locations along the border. And do you want to know what Putin said? In those idiotic I want to use some profanity, but I won't. People in the United States and across the EU from west to east, with the exception of one or two, what they don't understand is the severity of Putin's threat. And it was a threat. Russia said, and Putin said it clearly, that Russia would deliver a very serious, I'm quoting this, if not downright staggering response to any Ukrainian strike using US made Tomahawk missiles. What he further said was, these missiles are so complicated, require very extensive training that the Ukrainians don't have and don't have the time to master, which means that these missiles have got to be manned in Ukraine by Americans, which brings the United States, forget this proxy war bullshit, into direct conflict with Russia, in which they've been in direct conflict with Russia for decades, if not longer. Now, if the United States makes this mistake and they do not consider Russia's response, well, they're just willing to bring on World War III, which is not going to be a ground war like the previous world wars. It will result in a nuclear Armageddon. The big question is, are they crazy enough? Are they evil enough to bring humanity to that point? Now I'm going to move on something else. I've said this many times over the last really couple of years. Dmitry Medvedev, who is a deputy on the Russian Security Council, he's the former president of Ukraine in between Putin's first couple of years as president, when he stepped out and then returned after one term served by Medvedev to allow him to become and run for president again. Now, Dmitry Medvedev has been very outspoken over these last 2 or 3 years since the special military operation in Ukraine. When Putin and Lavrov speak, they speak in very measured, diplomatic terminology. When Dmitry Medvedev speaks, he speaks very bluntly. He speaks very clearly about what is on the minds of many of the people inside the Kremlin who make up Russian foreign policy. Now, many people have said Putin is a good guy, Medvedev is the bad guy. Good guy, bad guy cop. But I want to tell you this. Medvedev is not some lone wolf. He's not some rogue person who speaks on his own without the approval of the Kremlin. If that were the case, they would have gotten rid of him a long time ago. And I've said many times, people who are listening, if they are, and all of those rock star podcasters in the United States, I question whether they're listening to Putin's question and answer sessions, whether his responses to interviews, whether they're listening to Sergei Lavrov. If they're not listening to those two and Dmitry Medvedev, like they're listening to stereophonic sounds. It's the same message. One is very diplomatic, polished, reserved. The other is very blunt, very verbose. Here is what Medvedev said just yesterday, and I'm going to quote. The US is our adversary, and it is verbose in its peacemaking. It is now firmly on the warpath against Russia. Now, this is what else he said. The decisions that the United States is taking and the EU are an act of war against Russia. And he went on to say, and Trump is completely aligned with the EU and the UK. You don't hear Putin talking like that. You don't hear Lavrov, except in diplomatic language. Now, what he said was this: the new swing of the Trump pendulum, the back and forth, the roller coaster, the zigzags, he said has an important upside to it, though. It allows us, get this, it allows us to pound the Banderite hideouts in Ukraine, Banderite, Nazi, with all kinds of weapons without superfluous negotiations holding us back. Without superfluous negotiations, Alaska, Budapest, talks on the telephone between Trump and Putin, Putin and Trump, which are holding us back. And he went on to say, and to achieve victory in the only place where it's possible, which is on the battlefield, on the ground, and not behind some bureaucrat's desk. He said, by destroying the enemy, not by making meaningless deals. Hello, Trump. Are you listening? Oh, you consummate deal maker. You wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. This is all directed to you, dude. Do you comprehend that? And if you do, you're doing nothing about it. It's further proof that Trump is not the decider, as George the Cowboy said, I'm the decider. It's obvious. And the Russians know that no president in the United States really has anything to do with Russian foreign policy. Now, I want to talk about those sanctions. The EU just levied its 19th sanctions package on Russia. Now, I don't know if you're paying attention to this, but Foreign Minister Kaja Kallas, she's the former prime minister of, it's either Lithuania or one of the Baltics. I can't remember at the moment. She's not a very bright woman, but she announced, she's the foreign minister, that the EU had adopted the 19th sanctions package on Russia, which included the Russian car manufacturer, Solars, and 8 additional banks and financial institutions. And the list also included, get this, 12 companies from China, 3 from India, and 2 from Thailand. This recent package is also targeting Russian refineries, oil traders, petrochemical companies in other countries, including China and India. It is banning imports of Russian LNG, liquid natural gas, into the EU, but that won't happen for another 4 or 5 years. In case you don't know it, Russian gas and LNG is still getting to Europe indirectly. You have to wonder, cui bono? Well, who benefits from this? The oligarchs in both Russia and the other side. Gas, liquid natural gas, oil are what's big in terms of making these people wealthy. They also want to prohibit European companies from investing in Russia's special economic zones. Now, Russia just had its annual International Economic Forum in St. Petersburg, and there were hundreds, maybe thousands of companies, representatives of companies, even from the United States, who were there making deals, making arrangements. to invest in Russia. Interesting, isn't it? These sanctions that the EU just levied also restrict the exports of things like salt, ore, rubber, rubber tires, and building materials to anywhere in Europe and anywhere else. And that includes the export sales of these things to Russia, none of which Russia needs. Russia can get everything it needs from itself, which is resource rich, and what it can't get here, it gets from countries like China, from India, from Brazil, from Africa, and Asian countries. And there are more things, but I'll just end with this. They've prohibited transactions with Russia's Alpha Bank, MTS Bank, Absolute Bank, and other financial institutions. Now, I have to emphasize and proclaim it once again. These sanctions have had minimal, if no effect on Russia. What's happened, in fact, they've boomeranged and have caused incredible economic problems all across Europe and in the United States. What's happened in Russia? You want to know what's happened in Russia? There's been a boom in agriculture, unbelievable boom in return of agriculture. I can go to the local market, I can go to the grocery store, and I can buy fresh vegetables, fresh dairy products, best fruit without GMOs that are plentiful, that are healthy. The shelves in the supermarkets are full. It's rare that I would go into a supermarket, and I don't go there that often, but there are things that you need in a supermarket. It's rare there's an empty spot on any shelf. In fact, sometimes it's difficult to navigate between aisles in the supermarket because they're being stacked not at night when there aren't customers, during the day. There's no shortage of anything here in Russia. I can get anything I need, including Gillette gel to shave with, Gillette razors. I can get anything from clothes to shoes in terms of Nike, in terms of New Balance. Where do they come from? The same place they come from in the United States, from China. There's absolutely nothing that I need that I can't buy here. There's absolutely nothing that Russians need that they can't find anywhere here in their markets, in online, the supermarkets, or in retail stores. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about Trump canceled the meeting with Putin in Budapest, and he called it a waste of time. He didn't want to go there and not come away with something, a deal. Now, what he said was, well, maybe the U.S. won't fire Tomahawks, but maybe they will. I want to remind you of this. Just this month, on October 16th, Vladimir Putin had a phone call with Donald Trump. It lasted over 2 hours, the longest conversation they've had. The very next day, the 17th, Volodymyr Zelensky came to Washington on his best behavior, well-dressed, begging and kissing up to Trump for more weapons and more Tomahawks to be sent to Ukraine. Thursday, the day before, Putin definitely warned Trump, this is what's going to happen if you send Tomahawks. This is what's going to happen, okay? If you send any more money or weapons to Ukraine, it's not going to change the outcome, but it's going to become now your war, and not, quote unquote, senile old Joe's war. The next day, what was supposed to be a triumphant meeting again between the two turned out to be a disaster. Zelensky was humiliated. First of all, there was nobody to meet him at the airport. Second of all, his greeting at the White House by Trump was not a big photo op. Trump had a very stern face, opened the door, let him come in. They didn't meet in the Oval Office. They met in the afternoon, Friday afternoon, mind you, when most people are looking to get the hell out of there, get out of Washington, go back to their homes, wherever they are in Virginia and outside the Beltway. And they held this meeting around 1 o'clock. Zelensky begged. And Trump told him, forget it, dude. You're not getting anything. He was very rude to Zelensky. It was reported that the meeting was ugly and that Trump cursed at him several times. Now, you can't tell me that Putin's warning on the phone the day before didn't lead to this zigzag, this 180-degree, for the moment, change in Trump's position towards Ukraine and Russia. I think Trump got the shock of his life. I think those creeps around him, the deep state, those warmongers, also, at least for the time being, got the message. So the question of tomahawks to Ukraine right now are not being talked about, but as Trump and his advisors and J.D. Vance says, they're still on the table. I don't think they are. Now, a lot of people have criticized Vladimir Putin for being weak, as the United States and NATO has crossed one Russian red line after another. They claim that Putin was weak. He was afraid to respond. Well, I will say a couple of things about that. Number one, humanity can be grateful that Putin has been so patient and measured by not responding forcefully that would have led to a horrible escalation of this war that very easily could have resulted in a nuclear Armageddon. Both sides, okay, we're talking about this openly in the media. People in the streets who were aware in the United States and Europe understood how close we were to doomsday. I don't think the people in Russia were as fearful and threatened, but I think the Kremlin absolutely knew that's where it could go. So the rest of the world can be thankful to Putin for the restraint that he showed. Now, let's turn to China and what China's response has been. You know, for most people in the United States, you mention the word China, well, it's the same kind of thing when you mention Russia or Putin. China has been cheating. China has been stealing Russian technology, Russian secrets, blah, 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 blah. As if the United States hasn't been doing that forever in every freaking country around the world, including Russia and China. Give me a break. But here's what China has done. Recognize the pivot during Obama's reign, Hillary Clinton, the pivot to Asia, the redirecting massive military, naval forces to the East China region and sea, the building of new bases, building and reestablishing bases in the Philippines, reaffirming the Five Eyes, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, United States, threatening to bring NATO into the Pacific. The entire situation in Taiwan, where the United States has not only been sending money, but infiltrating it with the CIA, the USAID, and military equipment. Recognizing the fact that China has said Taiwan is China. China has been preparing for this for many years. They're not stupid. They have a 4,000 view of history. They play the long game. But here's what China has just done. In a very public message to Donald Trump, the deal maker, President Xi has laid down the gauntlet. He expanded China's export controls, get this, on critical materials like rare earth minerals, medium and heavy rare earth minerals, gallium and germanium that the United States needs across its industries, the military industrial complex. They need all of these minerals to produce the weapons that they produce. Without them, they're severely crippled. Now, these bans of China were a strategic response to the United States measures to specifically target the U.S. military and high-tech centers, rare earth minerals. You want to know what else this means? China expanded export controls on related technology, citing national security concerns, and the restrictions affected products containing even a trace amount of Chinese origin rare earth minerals or made with Chinese rare earth production technology. You know what else this meant? Technology and magnet imports. These things are desperately needed across the United States industries. High-tech civilian goods, not only in defense. And China asserted for the first time that its export controls apply extraterritorially. That means foreign countries must now seek approval from Beijing to export China's products containing these Chinese origin rare earth, and materials, or finished products which were produced in China or manufactured outside of China to the United States or elsewhere. This is incredible. And the thought that comes to mind is this. Is Russia, is the Kremlin paying attention to this, what I call a punch to the gut, or even a knockout blow to the jaw of the United States by banning these critical resources that the United States needs for its military and high-tech technological civilian needs? Unbelievable. And I want to, when you think about it, graphite, lithium batteries, super hard materials, the effect that this is going to have on the United States and the effect on the supply chain. Now, my question is this. Why hasn't Russia done the same thing to the United States and the EU? Well, you might ask, well, how can they? Stop selling liquid natural gas to the EU, gas and oil to the EU, gas and oil to places like India, which resell them at an enormous profit to the United States and to the EU and other countries. Why hasn't Russia stopped the much needed uranium to the United States? Why hasn't Russia stopped the sale of fertilizers, of which they are the largest exporter of fertilizers in the world? Why have they not stopped the export and sale of fertilizers to the United States? And it goes way beyond that. There are many more things that the United States needs from Russia than what Russia needs from the United States. I wish that Russia could learn from China's example. China is not afraid of the United States invading or attacking China. China finally has said, you know what? No more. We're not putting up with your bullshit. We're not putting up with your threats. We're putting you in your place today in the area where it's going to hurt you the most. I'm waiting and hoping that Russia will do the same thing. Now, I want to comment on something else. Most Americans believe that the Soviet Union was the Red Menace. I'm quoting Ronald Reagan. He coined these phrases: the evil nation, the godless nation, the Red Scare, the fear of communism, the domino theory in Vietnam, in Asia. Oh, that if we don't win this war in Vietnam, one communist country after another will emerge. So we have to knock them all down and kill all these innocent people who simply want the right to self-determination. Now, I have to tell you, I've been living here for 6 years almost, been coming here since 2016, 2014, 2016, 2018, 2019, for several months. And what I have found, and I've made many videos about this, and I'm not going to go into this in detail now, that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when I say collapse, I mean total collapse of the economic system in Russia. Devastating collapse, thanks to the United States, thanks to George Herbert Walker Bush, Bill Clinton, Jeffrey Sachs, and the Harvard boys that inflicted their shock therapy on the failing Russian economy. Many people died as a result, driven into poverty, alcoholism, drugs, extreme violence everywhere. Russia had become a desolate place, completely vanquished. And then the end of 1999, Boris Yeltsin realized the gig was up. He turned over the presidency to Vladimir Putin. And the following year, in the spring of 2020, Putin won election. It's 25 years ago. And for the exception of the few years, 4 years or 5 years that Dmitry Medvedev was president of Russia, Putin has reigned in all of those years. And from that, Russia has risen from the ashes, the proverbial phoenix rising from the ashes. A miracle, not only a modern day miracle of the rise to once again being a superpower, to being a leader and a positive leader on the global stage. And so for American people, communism died in 1991. Thanks to Mikhail Gorbachev, with his gladnos and with his perestroika, communism disappeared. With Yeltsin, it almost became a transition to United States version of free market predator capitalism. And then came Putin, who put an end to it. Now, people completely do not understand President Putin. He's been misquoted so many times, it's unbelievable. All of those rock star podcasters in the United States, I'm convinced hardly any of them listen to Putin's speeches, his press conferences. Hardly any of them listen to Sergei Lavrov, Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson for Putin, Maria Zaharova, the spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry. They don't listen to them. And if they do, they distort what they're saying. But here is what President Putin said about the Soviet Union and the dissolution of the Soviet Union. He called it a profound tragedy and has repeatedly lamented its collapse, seeing it as the breakup of historical Russia. Historical Russia. Russia has not always been communist. There was the whole period of the Tsars and the Romanovs. Putin's remarks reflected the long-held belief that the West had exploited the Soviet Union's weaknesses for geopolitical gain, and that millions and millions of ethnic Russians suffered as a result. Now, despite Putin's regrets, he also indicated, pay attention to this, that restoring the Soviet Union is not feasible. And he added, anyone who doesn't regret the passing of the Soviet Union has no heart. But anyone who wants it restored has no brains. In other words, give it up. All of you people in the West, all of you people who misinterpret what he said about wanting to restore the Soviet Union, about taking back all of those former Soviet republics under his control, has no brains. Now, let me comment on what I think that means to me. Well, I've been here long enough now. I've married a Russian, been accepted into the Russian family, been accepted by countless number of Russian friends, by people in the universities, academics, by journalists, by former military people, and even by political personages, people who are in government positions. I think I have a pretty good idea and a better idea of what's going on than most of those rock stars in the West. Now, here's what I can tell you that I have found from my own personal experience about what Putin was talking about. Now, I'm not talking about the younger generations who have been influenced by neoliberal ideas, by the thirst for capitalism, by the thirst for making more money, by the desire to leave, this godforsaken place to go to the United States where all of your dreams can be fulfilled. I want to tell you what the older generations who grew up and were educated during the Soviet Union, and this is what Putin was talking about. These people have preserved the traditional values of family. They preserved the traditional values of what it means to be a community of people who work together, who support each other, who help each other. I fell down 5 years ago at night here in Yalta, broke my hip. I was laying on the ground, 11 o'clock at night. I was immediately surrounded by, I don't know how many people, because I was in tremendous pain. I couldn't see. My wife had gone and ran to a location nearby to call an ambulance. And these people were caring for me. Somebody put a coat under my head. Some of them were speaking broken English. Are you okay? Did you have a heart attack? What do you want us to do? Well, that's just one example. You may say it's extreme, but there have been so many times when I have looked confused or lost, either out on the street looking for someplace or in a store, where inevitably somebody comes up to me and says, "Can I help you?" Even in English or in Russian. This is that sense of traditional values of helping each other. I can't tell you how many times I've experienced that in other situations. I'm living in an old, I think, Soviet era, I don't think it is, probably Khrushchev era housing development, where there are a number of these 5-story buildings side by side, front and back, where really thousands of people live. And this is Yalta. My area is a very hilly area. There's a lot of vegetation. There are a lot of trees. There are a lot of open spaces. There are a lot of little parks where children can play, where parents can bring their children. I think this is really caring about the community. But the thing that has impressed me most, I look out my window and now it's fall. Leaves are falling from the trees. We had quite a bit of rain. It's getting colder. And leaves are filling up this open area just outside my window. I've noticed this every year that I lived here now, going on 6 years. There are 2 or 3 old babushkas. A babushka is the word for real grandmother. These people are in their 80s. They're hunched over, and they're raking the leaves, putting them together in bags for somebody else to bring away and dispose of. You see this everywhere. I saw it in Moscow. This is the sense of the commons. This area belongs to us. We take care of it. There's a little old babushka in a house here. She recently died. Somebody's taken over the responsibility. But what they do, and I'm talking, these are 80-year-old people, maybe even late in their 80s, who are hunched over, who will be sweeping and washing 5 flights of concrete stairs in my apartment buildings. You see this everywhere. You not only see it in cases like that, you see it in the buses. Now, I don't like to think that I'm old. I'm 80 years old. I don't think I look it. People don't think I look it. But more often than not, if I get on a bus, and I'll have some comments about buses in public transportation here in a bit, inevitably, not a kid, but a little older person, maybe in their 30s, but certainly in their 40s or 50s, will get up and offer me their seat. I see this all the time for older people who are much older and much more infirmed looking than me, bent over with canes or crutches. People get up and give them a seat. Unfortunately, some of the younger people have not been brought up that way. They won't get up to give you the seat. They'll continue looking at their phone, pretending they don't see you, playing their video games, or texting their friends, or talking on their phone. Today, I was getting off a tram, electric trams, trolley buses here. They're wonderful, new, clean, modern. And I was trying to get off with a bunch of other people. And this one kid, about 14 years old, got right in front of me. He wouldn't move. And I put my hand on his chest, which I never do, and I probably shouldn't have done. I pushed him away. The woman behind me said to him, "Get down and let us get out." There's an example of what some of the younger people today, not brought up in that Soviet era, when there was awareness of respect of your elders, respect for the people, for the community, compared to the other people on the bus who were really offended by this punk who was blocking their exit. So I want to emphasize this. What am I talking about? I'm talking about Vladimir Putin, who described the collapse of the Soviet Union as a major geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. The point that I've been trying to make is Putin does not want to bring back the Soviet Union. What Putin has done throughout his 25 years here in power, as a patriotic Russian, as someone who grew up during the difficult times of the Soviet Union, during World War II, when his father was wounded, when his brother was killed, when millions of others died, killed, or were starved to death during the German siege, the Nazi siege on St. Petersburg. He grew up with nothing, but he grew up with values. The values of all of this belongs to us. The values are that we're family. Several families lived together in one small apartment. They helped each other. They cooked each other. They helped each other survive. This is what Putin is trying to hold on to. This is what it means when Putin says we must do all we can to preserve traditional Russian values, to preserve the church. He grew up when during the communist era, the church was prohibited. He and millions of others were baptized secretly by their grandmothers, brought to church underground and baptized. He wears a cross today. He takes part in religious activities. It's very public. A lot of people say it's just a PR stunt. I don't believe that. He makes a retreat every year for 1 week in a monastery, Orthodox monastery. What he's trying to do is disallow, prevent these neoliberal Western ideas from coming into Russia and destroying its culture, destroying its history, destroying its basic traditional values and respect for family and other people. This is what is sad, okay, about how the West, the United States, is viewing Russia. Now, I've done any number of videos and shows. It's about 659 now. This is right around that number, one of the last shows. And I've been trying to promote everything I've been talking about tonight, all of the good things, the positive things about Russia. There are problems in Russia. Some of them are serious. It's not my place as an American expat to harp on those. Those problems are for Russians to solve. Those problems are for Russians to talk about, to disagree about, to argue about, but not for me. My role, since I've been here, is to discover everything that I can through my eyes, through my camera, what none of us ever knew in the United States and the West about Russia. And it is absolutely amazing. The second part of my focus has been to counter the lies, the propaganda of the United States and the EU about all things Russia, the Russian people, and President Putin. That's what I've been trying to do. And in the present day context, what I'm trying to do is to educate and inform people about the truth of what is really going on now with this latest strategic goal of inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia, the decapitation of President Putin, and the stealing of its resources. Now, I want to switch gears and talk about some lighthearted things. I mentioned the sense of the commons, so I won't go into that again. But today I had lunch with a very good friend. He's from South Africa, as a matter of fact. I had lunch with him and his wife. They become very dear friends. She's Russian. They've been married together for, God, I don't know, maybe 30 years. Her English is excellent. His Russian, like mine, is poor, if non-existent. But we have these wonderful conversations. And today I showed up at this meeting and I was not in a really good mood. And we laughed and talked for 2 hours. We shared many wonderful things. And my friend, he's very upset that people in South Africa, his native country, and people in the West and America just can't see what he claims is the truth, what is obvious. Anyway, this is just one example of my life here. We met in this place that we all love to go to, our favorite pizza place. And just yesterday, the Three Amigos, who some of you know because a new show that I created in cooperation with these two dear friends, both of them from the United States. Uh, we call it the Three Amigos. We should have called it maybe the Three Comrades, but we have been trying uh, to show through our eyes the Russia that we've discovered and the Russia that we love. Now, these meetings with friends, these are English speaking friends, are really important. Uh, they provide an opportunity to discuss. None of us are reliving anything that other expats are reliving, like life in America, the 4th of July, Memorial Day, Thanksgiving, blah, 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 wave the flag. No, these are meetings that are lively, that are fun, that allow us to share our ideas and our views about where we came from, why we left, and how we see Russia. And these happen like almost weekly. Um, I also have many meetings, lunches, dinners with my Russian family and with Russian friends. There's the opportunity for me to attend conferences and forums with academics, university people, with journalists, even people from local politics. Um, all of these are very rewarding, and I feel very accepted and respected as an American who is very well educated, who has been a documentary filmmaker for 20 years, who's traveled extensively across Europe and through parts of Asia, across America. And that feeling of being accepted, and I'm the only American that ever shows up at I'm the only one that is even being invited, is a very rewarding experience. And I have to tell you, many of these conferences uh, focus on things that the United States is doing. How do I know? I don't understand the language. My wife is always with me and translates, but I hear Amerikanets, America. So I know they're talking about America. And then she translates and tells me what they're saying. Nothing new. I get it. But do you know what the difference is? The difference is these people have never lived in America. They've never grown up in their culture. So they're reflecting what they see America through their eyes here in Crimea and in Russia. On the contrary, what I offer is different because I share with them the America that I knew and grew up in over these last 80 years. And for that reason, I think many of these people respect me and accept me uh, in their meetings. I've become friends with many of them. Now, a couple of other lighthearted things. You know about Russians. Now, I've never experienced this anywhere else in the world, much less in the United States. People here love their animals, especially dogs and cats. Now, this bothered me at first and still makes me a little irritated, but most Russians are living in small apartments. They're not living in 4 or 5 bedroom homes like most Americans do, or in 3 or 4 room apartments like most Americans do. They're living in small apartments. So they don't have big dogs. There are people with big dogs, like German Shepherds, like Labradors, and other breeds that I can't even recognize. But they have these little tiny dogs, which I think are just like dessert or would be dessert for some of the bigger dogs. And they carry them with them. They bring them on the bus, carrying them in their arms. They carry them as they're walking through the streets, into the grocery stores, into malls, into restaurants, and the restaurants allow it. The interesting thing is, these dogs almost all extremely well behaved. They don't wander around. among people in the stores or the restaurants or on the bus, they pretty much stay put. So they're not a disturbance. And so restaurants and these types of retail stores are very dog friendly. I was very surprised to see that. Sometimes I don't like it if they're too close to you, or you're on a crowded bus and somebody's holding a dog and the dog is looking and wants to lick your nose. That bothers me a little bit. Now, cats. Here in Yalta, I don't know what it's like really in other cities like Moscow or St. Petersburg, but here in Yalta, there are lots of dogs and cats that roam free. They're not, in other words, domesticated. They're not really wild. They rely on people, good hearted people, to feed them. You see it everywhere. And in my apartment building, we have a kitty that I think was one of these stray cats. Somehow we adopted it. It came to our door, we fed it, it kept coming back, then we took it in. And so now it's an indoor outdoor cat, and she's a great pet. But there are two or three other cats who come to this building who are not taken in by anybody, but everybody takes care to feed them several times a day and to put water out for them. This isn't just my apartment building, it's everywhere. And I found that on the one hand, like, okay, they should be controlling these animals that are not vaccinated, that don't belong to somebody, that are procreating every single year, and their offspring are running all over the place. However, that doesn't seem to be the case. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. It's another example of how Soviet era people, the older people, not so old, really do take care of these cats and dogs that don't belong to somebody. Now, I'm going to finish on this note. This has been kind of a long rant, but I've been wanting to talk about these things for a long time. What's the current awareness of people here in Russia? Do Russians know what's going on? Do they support their president? Absolutely, yes. Do they care about what's happening in the United States? Not very much. Do they know about everything that's going on in the United States, like the No Kings protest? Do they know about the militarization of American cities that Trump has just sent in the military to, supposedly to fight illegal immigration, but to break up gangs and drugs? If they know about it, they don't talk about it, and I don't think they care. Those that do and pay attention to what's happening really feel sorry for what they see happening in the America that they thought was the dreamland. Their idea of how America has been promoted in the movies, in videos, with all of their celebrities, they feel really sorry that their dream of what America was is collapsing. Now, people often ask me, and they often say, Regis, be safe over there. They know that I'm living in Crimea. They know that there's a war going on in the Ukraine. They even know that we in Crimea have been attacked multiple times by Ukrainian drones and by long range missiles. Most have been destroyed, but recently there was one attack that took place about 20 miles from where we live in Yalta. 4 or 5 people were killed. They struck a 5-star resort, and it was on a Sunday, and they struck a school. Fortunately, school was out on Sunday, Nobody was hurt, but a great deal of damage was done. So I have friends saying, be safe over there. And are you okay? Well, for those of you that have followed me this far in this monologue, I've got to tell you and repeat it again and again and again. Life here in Crimea and in Russia is calm in spite of these daily and nightly attacks by drones. Life here is safe. Life here is not chaotic, it's peaceful. There is not the political chaos that exists in the United States and the West. There are not the social and cultural divides that separate people, that turn people against each other. It just doesn't exist here. When people talk about Donald Trump, some will say, well, he's erratic, or maybe he's a little unstable, or we just don't care. We know that it doesn't matter who the president is in the United States. It's what's behind him. One president after another has made no difference at all in the position of the United States and Europe towards Russia. I have to say this again. Everybody I've met here wants to live in peace with each other, with everyone. They want to get along with everyone. And all of them want to benefit and prosper and provide a healthy, loving, and affordable life for their children and grandchildren. To a Russian, this is what they believe. There's almost no, I've never heard of any crime here except an occasional murder somewhere, but I've never even felt fearful or unsafe anywhere here. Children unaccompanied by parents. And now these are kids that are probably 7 or 8 years old, walking home from school, taking a bus alone or a trolley bus to get home. They have their own little debit card to pay the fare, which is only about 40 cents, very inexpensive. And there's no fear. Little old ladies, babushkas, out at night. Young women, many of them, there are many here, unmarried, who are out late at night, walking alone on dark streets, unafraid. It's an amazing feeling. I don't think you can get that anywhere in the United States. I never felt it. Certainly not in places like Boston, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Arizona, wherever else I've lived. Now I'm going to finish on this note. I was involved in citizen diplomacy for several years. It's actually what brought me to Russia in the first time in 2016, 2018, and 2019. At the time, before the sanctions and before COVID, the idea was somewhat alive and vibrant that people from the United States would come together in delegations to Russia to discover for themselves, to open their eyes about the reality of Russia, and to meet Russians up close and personal. In these delegations, members traveled from east to west, north to south in Russia to be able to bring back together and share what they've learned. It was incredible. Same thing happened to me the first couple of times. It happens to any American who would come here for at least a month, not with a tour company, but with a delegation, with the purpose of discovering the true Russia. Unfortunately, COVID came, travel restrictions were imposed. It cut that down, including tourism, dramatically, and then immediately followed up in 2022 with massive sanctions that prohibited people, vast majority of people, from coming here, and plus the war in Ukraine made it very unlikely that most people want to come to a conflict zone. The point that I'm making is this: citizen diplomacy may be done for the time being. There doesn't seem to be a willingness on either side to even reconvene meetings between Americans and Russians, even using media, video conferencing. I've tried repeatedly to try to get this going between people I know in the United States, people I know in Russia, and there just does not seem to be the interest, the desire, or the will to do it again. This is really sad, because I believe that if only people from both countries could travel and meet each other, not on tours with companies, but be able to stay for a while, live the life a bit, see it from the perspective of being in another country, that things could possibly change. Unfortunately, given the political reality, the almost no political relationships between our two countries, the United States and Russia, it just doesn't exist. I don't see it happening anytime soon. I want to leave on a positive note if I can. I think there is hope, and the hope lies in this new emerging multipolar world that Russia has been at the forefront of. She's not alone. China, India, South Africa, Brazil, another 27 some countries have all bought into this emerging new multipolar world where there is the respect for the sovereignty of every nation, regardless of how large or how small. There's the belief in that we all inhabit this planet and we have to work together in peace to develop each other, to raise each other to whatever level they desire and are capable of, to support this growth, to respect civilizational differences, and to abide by international law and the principles of the United Nations Charter. President Putin, in my opinion, has been the leading protagonist in this vision and promoting it for a new world order. The flip side of this, it's a world order that is moving away from the domination and the hegemony of the West, primarily the United States and the Great Britain. They see it as a war. They see it as an existential war against the maintaining of dominance in the world, against the weaponization of the dollar, against the use of sanctions on everyone, friend and foe alike, which help no one. And my friends, I've said this in my videos, in my films. This is the epic battle, primordial battle for the future order of the world. The question I ask, will those people in the West, in Washington, in London, whoever they are, recognizing that they have lost this epic battle for the future order of the world, take us all down in a nuclear Armageddon? Our hope lies in a future built on mutual respect, the sovereignty of all nations, the strict observance of international law, and the respect for the principles of the United Nations Charter. This is what all of us need to be working towards, not fighting and protesting over individual causes in the United States and Europe, but on the future of our lives and the future of the planet. Thanks for sticking with me if you did.